What we can say is the police have arrested some people today, but they're not from the pro-Palestinian march. They're from Just Stop Oil. Just Stop Oil are back out there, of course, because, you know, there's no end to their crusade to stop us from exploring for new oil and gas. They've actually issued, believe it or not, the most ridiculous tweet so far of the week. I know it's only Monday, but they said this after they were arrested for marching around slowly around Parliament Square. The Metropolitan Police, under orders from our criminal government, stop a peaceful march. Instead of investigating the criminals pushing new oil and gas, it is a policy in line with, wait for it, genocide.
I mean, it's a complete...
What?
I'm sick of them using these phrases.
Yeah.
Anyone who opposes them is evil. This is how they like to characterise anyone who raises questions about what they're doing. They are utterly, utterly apocalyptic voices. They're cult-like.
Right.
This is the language of cults.
These are the same people who talk about the climate emergency and that if we don't do something about it, like right this minute, that the world is going to end, people are going to die of starvation. I think the last time they were all out and about, there was that woman who was being interviewed on Sky, I think it was, literally weeping, saying, don't you care about your children? Saying to the person interviewing her, why are you even here? You should be out with us on the streets, you know, demanding the government do something. I mean, it's quite deranged, isn't it?
It is. And, you know, it's funny because at the moment, a sort of middle ground has opened up on the climate debate. I mean, Rishi Sunak has tried to talk a bit about net zero, possibly be more pragmatic about it.
At least put it off for a bit until people can actually afford to do the things they want us to do.
The practical, pragmatic things. I mean, those are the people who are really going to make any difference. It's not going to be Just Stop Oil running around screaming, accusing people of genocide. They are really not going to be the people who are going to create any difference in the world.
No. I mean, particularly given what is actually currently going on. I mean, we're talking there about a COBRA meeting being held because of the front of the Times today. Very, very serious sort of escalation, if you like, of the terror threat in this country. And when you look around the world and see what's happening, where we see groups of men chasing people in an airport to see if they're Jewish, and we see what happened in Australia, we see what happens in America, in other countries in Europe. I mean, if you were a Jewish person, you would be pretty terrified right now.
Yes. I mean, you are 100% right. I mean, anti-Semitism is its own thing. It's an ancient hatred, and we know that language which is negative about Jewish people is connected to violence and murder. I mean, this is going back centuries now. There have been numerous massacres.
And it's not like they're keeping any secrets here. I mean, we're hearing chants about jihad. We're hearing chants, much worse chants, actually, in Australia. Gas the Jews. We're hearing them saying, kill the Jews, you know, slaughter the Jews. I mean, it's unbelievable that the police, and we're going to talk about this later on in this hour with a barrister, seem incapable of doing anything to stop it.
You know, one person I know compared it to the Rotherham grooming gang scandal. You know, that it's almost too... They feel like it's too sensitive a topic and they don't want to touch it. And they're sort of backing away from it. But they absolutely should not be backing away from it. This is a very difficult, complex problem that we have right now. I mean, we are a liberal democracy, but as we can see, as has been reported, there may be hostile state agents from Iran, for instance, subverting subverting our democratic freedoms for their own ends. And we have to be very careful of that.
I mean, for a long time, there have been people saying to me, you know, this mass immigration which is now going on from, you know, central parts of Africa, from parts of North Africa, from sub-Saharan Africa. You know, I was astonished when I was told just a few weeks ago, and I was shown a video of sub-Saharan African people arriving on the border between Mexico and the United States, having been transported there by people traffickers. You know, they're not just coming through Lampedusa in Italy, they're coming all the way across the Atlantic and going into the United States via Mexico. And you think, surely this is not something that's just happening. You know, this is almost as though there is an orchestration behind it. And I'm not talking about some kind of United Nations-inspired conspiracy. I'm talking about foreign powers possibly acting against the West.
We just have no idea. I mean, the human traffickers are in no way going to be scrupulous about who they bring over.
They don't care.
They don't care. And, I mean, reports have come out now about like former Hamas members, some Hamas chief, living in Barnet, in a council house, and he was given a British passport.
One of the heads of the Palestinian protest, it was a guy associated with a prescribed terrorist group, which is banned in all sorts of countries in the Middle East, but not here. Turns out it's an NHS GP in North London.
It's terrifying.
I mean, what on earth has been going on?
I don't know. I mean, you know, some people have said perhaps they use it for intelligence gathering services, but, you know, for a lot of people, they say, this makes me feel unsafe in my community. I need to know about things like this.
Well, I mean, I ask myself the question, I don't spend much weekend time in London, but I have to ask myself the question of all these people, if there's 100,000 of them, maybe more, marching through the streets, you know, there will be probably the token sort of silly old socialists with white beards,
Yes,
Jeremy Corbyn
yes.
lookalikes and all of that. But most of the people appear to be people who support a free Palestine, but are also quite vociferous and quite aggressive about Muslim ideology and anti-Jewish ideology.
Yes, and you know the thing is that nowadays, as a lot of people who are deeply knowledgeable about anti-Semitism will say, it will often take the language of decolonization.
Yes.
So you know they'll talk about things like the Zionists, but they won't say Jews, they'll say Zionists.
Yes.
But it's the
As
same
if that's
old,
all right.
yeah, it's the same old anti-Semitism, just taking a new form, trying to find acceptable ways to present itself.
And it's actually worse now, it seems to me, than the olden days of kind of, you know, anti-Semitic behaviour, because this is now kind of carved out of the social justice hoop, isn't it? So that, you know, you're actually a good person because you're against the dreaded jackboot of fascism, i.e. Israel, and you're actually all about saving the poor, downtrodden people.
Exactly. That's exactly what has happened. I mean, Jake Wallace-Simons, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, has spoken about this, how it always cloaks itself, anti-Semitism cloaks itself in the language of the time. And the language of our time is social justice. So you can present yourself or try to present yourself as someone good while saying very, very, very prejudicial things.
Because, I mean, effectively, some of the people involved in this social justice movement aren't saying very much different things to what Oswald Mosley was saying in the 1940s when they were walking around with the brown shirts kicking Jewish people out of the East End.
Do you know, that
that worries me.
I keep thinking about the Battle of Cable Street.
Yeah.
You know, when they marched on the streets of London, but they met huge civil resistance
They did.
then.
Yeah, because they were the bad guys. But now I worry that these people are being seen as the good guys, but their message is the same.
Yes, yes. It was only after the war, because he tried again, Mosley tried to march again in the early 1960s. And I mean, was violently shut down in the streets because at that time people had fought the Nazis and I mean, they had absolutely no tolerance for it. These things aren't new. We've always had to deal with them. I think every so many years, a new generation has to confront these things and confront these ancient hatreds. And like you say, how prepared are we to deal with it?
Yes. Well, I think we have to be much better prepared, because at the moment it doesn't look as if we are very prepared at all, both politically and indeed from the point of view of the police. But talking of eras, you know, it almost feels as though we've moved into a new era now, doesn't it?
I agree.
That we've sort of gone post-Brexit, post-COVID. You know, we're now in sort of post-apocalyptic times when almost anything is possible. Reading this morning about Boris Johnson favouring a soft touch over lockdowns. This is according to Professor Gupta, somebody who's on this show and this station quite a lot, Professor Sunetra Gupta. She's going to be giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, saying that Boris Johnson at the time of COVID kind of happening was very much in favour of a Swedish-style you know, laissez-faire approach, if you like, and something changed his mind.
Yes. Yes, well, I mean, everything did suddenly change. I mean, there were the reports at the time that we weren't going to have a hard lockdown, that vulnerable people were going to be cocooned, and if we were going to have any lockdown, it was going to be very brief at the peak moments when cases were peaking, and then that was it. And then suddenly it was when the Imperial College report came out, which...
This was the Neil Ferguson thing.
Yes, which said that there were going to be hundreds of thousands of deaths unless we'd lock down now. And then they panicked and they changed their minds and everything changed. And I mean, Sunetra Gupta, I mean, she's also a very renowned epidemiologist. I mean, she was absolutely pilloried for her views. She tried desperately to get in front of the government to present her view.
This is the thing that characterises our media now and our political sort of landscape, is that, you know, if you do take a different view, you know, you are absolutely piled on. At a massive rate. I mean, we know from Julie Hartley-Brewer's apology last week that she got from the government that they were giving out, taking down names and making charges against people. It was entirely unfounded.
Yes, and why was the army monitoring journalists?
I know.
I mean, that was so alarming. I mean, I'll never forget when that MP, Neil O'Brien, compiled a list of journalists. You know, just people who were giving an alternative view. And I remember thinking how chilling that was. It was so chilling. And I thought, you know, for a lot of younger journalists who aren't used to this, aren't used to that sort of fight, it would have shut them up. And they wouldn't have spoken out.
Well, again, it was kind of government by permission, if you like. You know, if you were allowed into the COVID briefing, if you were allowed to ask a question, you know, that was all done on the basis of if you were going to behave. You know, if you were going to start asking questions they didn't like, you weren't going to be allowed in.
I know. And, you know, Boris Johnson says he did favour the Swedish model, but I want to know why he changed his mind.
I'm not sure if that's the Swedish model he was talking about. You know, maybe a different Swedish model. But, I mean, looking back at that time as well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you see now, it seems an age away. You know, Nicola Sturgeon's back in the news this morning because of some missing WhatsApp messages. And the way that she would always try and kind of get one over on the government. And it was this kind of dueling First Minister, Prime Ministerial briefings. She would always try and get out ahead of it.
Yes.
They would always try and get out ahead of her.
Yes.
It was kind of ludicrous, you know, tit-for-tat thing.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, in Scotland, they always went over and above. I mean, it was always just that one bit further than the British government. She must have known that there was going to be a public inquiry. So why these messages have been deleted, I mean, that is suspect.
Right. Well, anyone who deletes WhatsApp messages is not doing them by accident, as far as I can say.
No, absolutely not. I mean, for me, I'm just fascinated by her complete retreat from public life. I mean, this was someone who was always front and centre.
Yep.
When she left politics, everyone assumed she was going to have a media career, perhaps, or maybe she was going to enter the EU. But she's retreated totally. We don't see her anymore. It's been this total downfall. I mean, even Boris Johnson, to an extent, I mean, he's sort of carving out a media career for himself. But I mean, he hasn't been involved in politics. He's sort of gone to, you know, like gone to ground, and we hear from him occasionally in his not very political columns for the Daily Mail. I mean, there have been so many casualties of that era. Political leaders, you think about Jacinda Ardern. I mean, she's a big one as well.
It's hard to believe that they've all just gone, isn't it?
Yes, and they say Justin Trudeau as well. I mean, that, you know, the public are really unhappy with him too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, of course, going back to America at that time, Donald Trump was the president as well.
Yeah, he was an early one,
And he doesn't, I mean, he may come back, you never know. But it is weird, isn't it, that we have this kind of... again, compartmentalised sort of, maybe an era doesn't last as long as it used to. You know, they're not, this is what they say, you know, $1 billion isn't what it used to be. Because that era is gone. It is, you know, the era of all of those individuals you just named. None of them are here anymore.
Yes. And, you know, it's fascinating, but it feels like we're moving from crisis to crisis. I mean, I feel like October 7th, the world changed, and I think we all felt it change. This isn't just some regional thing. We all know we've moved into something different now. We're entering into a darker, more unstable era.
And I think also you have to take into account, because it's not a small thing, the numbers of people who would be sympathetic, generally speaking, to the Palestinian cause, who have moved to live in countries like Britain and America, and Australia. You know, even those just 3 countries to start off with.
And you could see the revivification of anti-Semitism. And that's a deep concern. I mean, you know, many people who I know in the Jewish community are worried. They are genuinely worried. This brings up so much historical trauma for them.
And if you think it's not an important issue for us domestically, just look at the mess Keir Starmer finds himself in. Trying to figure out how the pathway is that he can cut through it. Because I think he's got a problem.
I think so. And I think for a lot of people, they're going to be worried about the Labour Party now. You know, if they're in power, what sort of policy will Keir Starmer take? Because he doesn't seem to be able to keep a strong, consistent line. You know, as soon as he sees that he's displeasing people in his party, he tries to appease them, and that's his personality. And in times like ours, you do not want leaders like that. You want people who are strong and they know who they are and they can stand by their beliefs. That's so important.
And then finally, last year we had Matt Hancock. This year we're talking about Nigel Farage going into the jungle for I'm a Celebrity. I'm sure it will be quite entertaining. I mean, he will be, because unfairly, as he often is, created as a kind of hate figure. You know, he will be the Matt Hancock of this year if he does go in, won't he?
But he's actually very popular. Yeah, he's not, you know, for some people, he might not be their cup of tea, but for a lot of people, they actually really like him.
Well, he's a really likeable guy, actually. I mean, I always find it staggering that these kind of, you know, lefties and people that really, really detest Nigel Farage, it's completely unbalanced. You know, the man is not detestable. He is not even unpleasant. He's a very pleasant guy. He's a very smart guy. And he's actually an incredibly influential man when it comes to, you know, British politics.
I would advise anyone, make up your own mind about someone, not what a very partisan media will tell you. I mean, for instance, Jared Kushner, who worked with Donald Trump in the White House. Yes, he just did a podcast with a very well-known podcast in the US called Lex Friedman. And many people on the left said, I thought this guy was an idiot. He's not an idiot. He's really intelligent.
Pop quiz. Well, I mean, you don't get to do those kinds of things unless you've got a reasonable modicum of common sense. It has to be said. I mean, I wish I could say the same for the Labour Party, but that's another story altogether. Candice, good to see you. Thank you very much.